So I'm delighted in this episode of the Make and Market podcast to be joined by Ian Guiver and Joseph Spear on our discussion on what makes remarkable content and what that looks like. So first and foremost, I'm just going to hand over to Ian. Ian, thanks so much for your time. And can you just give the listeners a quick introduction as to who you are and what your role is?
Hi, I'm Ian Guiver. I'm the Managing Director of Axon Garside. I joined the business 24 years ago, I'm appalled to say. And I've been running the business for the last 12 years. My background is in sales before I got into marketing. Met Joseph actually when I was a young salesperson. And so we go back a very long way, but now I run Axon Garside, and in particular which is a marketing, web and HubSpot technology company.
Fantastic. And the same with yourself as well, please, Joseph.
Yeah, I'm Joseph Spear. I'm a fractional chief marketing officer, which means that I work as a chief marketing officer, a CMO, for more than one company at the same time. I've got over 39 years experience in product and corporate marketing behind me. So I draw upon all of that experience on every single customer engagement. I'm also working as an investor and also a mentor, for example, with Innovation Martlesham at the world famous Adastral Park in Suffolk, which is BT's research campus.
Oh, fantastic. So a lot of content experience amongst the three of us. So first and foremost, just to kind of keep the discussion off. So just going to open it up to the floor, really. So what do we mean when we say remarkable content? Of course, content playing such a big part in marketing, but what does remarkable content truly look like?
You like to kick off, Joseph?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's an old nutshell, isn't it? What is remarkable about content? What is remarkable content? So let's just have a think. Let's first of all start by thinking about what it's not. Okay, so what isn't it? Remarkable content then isn't stuffed shirts and handshakes, right? How many times have you seen on LinkedIn or social feed, or even on, like company videos, promo videos, you got stuffed shirts or suited people shaking hands with equally incognito people? It's so cliched now, isn't it? Unless you're shaking hands with an alien life form, the shaking hands thing is pretty much done to death, isn't it? Let's agree on that. So, you have to go a little bit further to think about what remarkable could be for you. And I guess really the acid test about remarkability or remarkable content is if you just ask yourself, so what? If you want to put an expletive in the middle of that, so what? You can. In other words, would whoever's receiving this want to share it? And that's really the acid test. Would they share it? And if you think maybe it's not shareable, or it's not, it's not got a quality about it that engenders a desire or almost like a reflex action to share it with your friends or share it with your network, the chances are it's probably not that remarkable. Okay, so remarkable then kind of comes in a couple of different flavors. Really, if we break it down to the types of people that I've met across my 39 years experience, you get the logical people and you get the emotional people. What do I mean by that? Kind of the logical thinkers. These tend to be like technical officers. They tend to be process-driven people. They tend to, really think about and live on and feed off compliancy issues, these kinds of things. So in an industrial environment, there's an awful lot of emphasis, isn't there, on statutory compliance, regulatory compliance, and this kind of thing. And you find that people who occupy these kind of roles are often logical people, logically driven people. So they just want the bare facts. They want it in consumable ways. So for these kind of individuals, I find anyway, that the kind of remarkable content that appeals to them would be things like infographics or rich pictures. These kinds of things are instrumental in helping people think through problems or coming to a resolution or a solution about something that's bothering them. And infographics, charts, yes, bar charts, Gantt charts, these kinds of things, schematics, they're very often useful for the logical thinkers, the logical people. Whereas in contrast, for the emotional, it's really about, you know, the comedy and the tragedy of life. The comedy, what I will say is I'll put a caveat around the comedy, because humor is a very difficult thing. I think you probably agree, Ian. You know, the comedy element in marketing, you come across, for example, you know, I've used comedy in the past. So, for example, I can think of, you know, characters, famous characters from TV shows where you ask them to do a celebrity endorsement about what they're doing, for example. But if, you know, if the comedy it doesn't sit well in, say, an industrial environment, or that comedic character or persona that you're engaging to promote your products or your services doesn't sit well with the end audience in that particular industry, then it's not gonna hit the mark. But if it does, or if it's like in a if it's like a definite dissonance, it doesn't normally resonate, or if it's disruptive. So, for example, you know, you could have like a character ventriloquist act in an accounting world, you know, where accountants or financial people are driven by different levers and different focus points and different emphases on special interest groups, for example. You know, you place something, a disruptive influence like a comedic ventriloquist act in that environment, then, you know, suddenly you've got a remarkability, providing that you have a relevant message. And it's all about relevant. It's all about, in my experience, matching the relevance of the message with the relevance of the portrayal of that message, or the character that you engage to bring that message. Other types of tragedy comedy. So tragedy, for example, emergency. You think of the pictures and the imagery that come to mind when you think of emergency fundraising appeals. We're seeing wars and all kinds of disasters, natural disasters and so forth around the world, aren't we? You think about these kinds of emergency fundraising appeals. Now, they're across the board. They have to straddle and appeal necessarily to all kinds of different industry types and people types, because you really only get one hit at it, one shot at it, one broadcast opportunity, perhaps donated by a major media channel, for example. So they have to be a very broad brush, but they use deliberately emotive kinds of imagery with voiceovers and things like that to complement the narrative. But usually it's based on tragedy. It's usually emotive because it's based on tragedy. So, you know, the playoff, I mean, it's a classic dramatic art, isn't it? The playoff between comedic or comedy and tragedy, the highs and the lows of life, and the portrayal of these kind of things. But what I'm trying to explain to you is, you know, look for these kinds of qualities, this sort of caliber in the creative content that goes into remarkable content for sharing social, for publicizing your products or services. How's that for starters?
Tell you what, you've set Ian up now. Go on, Ian. It was a great way to kind of you know, summarize, you know, your perspective, Joseph. Ian, what's your take on what remarkable content looks like?
Fresh in my mind, I haven't got a notepad. Joe's made many points there. I guess picking up on a couple of them. I think, to me, one of the things about remarkable content is first of all, there's a context, which is remarkable content for me is content that does the job it's meant to do for the company that produces that content. And it'll do that job if it's remarkable from the point of view of the person, the target audience that is going to consume that content. And the dictionary, I think, says that remarkable means special and worth mentioning, which is kind of Joseph's point there about it's something you're going to share. Why would you share it? Because I think it's going to genuinely help the person I'm sharing it with, because it's going to reflect well on me, because I trust the source of it. And I think the reason that we're talking about remarkable content today is because in the last 20 years, we've gone from a situation where the content online that was produced by companies that are outside their own propaganda is quite limited. I mean, when I started working with people doing this kind of stuff 15 years ago, if you were a manufacturing software company and you were doing content online, you stood out from everybody else just by virtue of the fact you're doing it. Today, every man and his dog's doing it. So there is an onus on doing something a little bit better. And picking up on Joseph's point about the left brain, right brain thing, I think that we've gone to a situation where you've got to get the basics right. So it's got to be talking to the fundamental needs of the person you're addressing.
Absolutely.
But secondly, it's got to be wrapped and contextualized in something. I think the word I'd use is creativity. It's and what that really means is it's either got to be in a wrapper, which, as Joseph said, is either funny or worrying or challenging, but also it probably needs to sit alongside a campaign. And an example of that, I think, would be, we've been doing some work with a software company. I won't say who they are for reasons that become obvious, but they work helping primary care organizations, and their software and their educational content is really helping people to understand how software like theirs can address some fairly fundamental challenges that sector's got. But they are very brave, because where the campaign bit, where the creative bit comes in, is that they have suffered a reputation for having for problems with their product. And so the campaign that might sit alongside that, for example, could be addressing in a challenging or amusing or funny way that reputational issue. Because if you don't do that, anybody that consumes their content will merely think, oh yeah, that's the company that's blah blah. So it's got to sit next to it. So those two things. I think the other thing is, I'm going to mention a guy that's been around for a long time. People may have heard of him, Marcus Sheridan, and I think he hit the nail on the head, because he said there are 5 things that people who read content want to know, and they're 5 things that are very, very often absent in people's content, which makes it unremarkable. And those 5 things are, people always want to talk about, what's the best way to do something? How does one way compare to another? What are the problems, particularly if you're British? I think maybe that's just a parochial obsession, but I always think British people are always looking for the downside and everything. What's the problem with whatever it is you're suggesting? What are the reviews of that thing? And what's the price? And most people don't talk about those things in their content. They don't talk about the competition. They don't talk about the downsides. They don't talk about any of those things. And the courage to talk about the things that the buyer actually wants to read or watch about creates trust, and that makes you stand out from an awful lot of other people who, I think, create their content in a kind of vacuum that's not in the real world, and the reader can sniff it. Maybe we're going to talk in the next section about why their content's like that and why they think that's a good idea. But that, to me, is the key thing: is adding real value, talking about what we talk about, and finally, I would say having an opinion, because most of us go and ask people. The reason people are watching this now is they want an opinion, they want advice. That's why people buy Joseph's services. That's why they buy Axon Garside. They want advice, and yet many companies produce all kinds of content and shy away from giving an opinion or advice.
Yeah, sure. I think it is one of those things, isn't it? I think it's really interesting, Ian, you say there that people are almost scared to focus on the negatives, but it almost comes back to that. It comes back to that element of know, like, and trust. There's no such thing as a perfect company, and when you start trying to address yourself as being that perfect solution through content, it's when it starts looking a little bit disingenuous and people don't trust you, and it has the adverse effect. So I think that's a really good point. I think that's a good point that you raise.
Trust is so, let me just compliment that a little bit and just say trust is so often misconstrued. And when it comes to remarkable content creation, it's the ability to be visible and also be credible. You've got to have those 2 things held in tension. You can't have one or the other. It's got to be and. The beauty of and, right? And you can't. Ian, you brought out a fantastic point there about a company that knows it has a problem with its market perception. And
Yeah.
that's one of the hardest things of all to change, because that perception has probably been generated over a period of time, and the company may well be the last people to learn about that problem.
Mm.
But you have to address these things head on, and I've certainly found in industries such as, I don't know, let's take one as an example, forensic electrical engineering. Where companies that I've worked with and helped, they have identified problems that other maybe competitors have had, that they suddenly are aware that they themselves have had, and they've gone about deliberately focusing on that in their communications materials, in their creation of remarkable content, in order to hit that head on. And if you hit it head on, it often, not always, but often dispels it more quickly than it took to create that misconception.
Mm-hmm.
And you can change that. I mean, we see it, don't we, with fast-moving consumer goods, cola drinks, for example, where you've got the mighty manufacturers warring against each other for market share and stuff like that. And they run very, very expensive ads in primetime television slots, and in the ad breaks of big football games and stuff like this, in order to war against one another. But so often, they are marketing in a kind of a repetitious way. It's a drip, drip, drip. And that's also something that I think remarkable content is very important to consider. How would this be perceived if someone sees it 8 times in the next 2 hours? How would it be perceived if it's popping up on my timeline in the morning at my lunch break, and then in the afternoon during my break time in the afternoon? What is the frequency? Is what I'm trying to explain to you. Am I over egging it if people see this more than once? And quite often the answer to that is you're not, because it takes quite a lot of opportunities to be seen, or OTS, opportunities to see, to break through the barriers now, where people have really raised their threshold and their filter system of filtering out sales messages of all kinds. The average person will probably see upwards of 1,000, maybe 2,000 sales messages per day. And it's our job as creators of remarkable content, targeted to the correct audiences at the correct time, in the correct way, in the correct language, in the correct format, logical, emotional, these kinds of plays, using the tools available at our disposal to be as precise as we possibly can with that message. So that credibility and that visibility matches perfectly.
Absolutely. And I think this so oftentimes it is back to some really core basics. What is it that we're doing as a company that's really important to our customers that we do better than other people? What are the needs? What's the language of the customer? Where is the customer? What is driving the customer? In B2B, that recognition that customers very rarely want to spend money. They want to solve problems, not spend money. And what is it? What's going on? And then addressing their needs in a way that is frank and honest and open is the basic starting block that most people fail to achieve, I think. And the problem is, it's interesting that Joseph mentions 2,000 sales messages. One of the things that we're beginning to see is a reduction in the willingness of people, for example, to download stuff that sits behind a form. And the truth is, there's so much bad, unremarkable content around that everybody is getting tarred with the same brush. So the content has got to be all the more remarkable, really, to stand out and battle that problem, even if it's not one that you've created yourself. That's
a fantastic point. In one sense, there's a very strong argument now where don't put a gate on a download of, I don't know, brochure or PDF or something like that. If it's not good enough, don't offer it. Be prepared to give it away, and not collect information about people when you do that. Don't ask for mobile numbers and email addresses. Just give it away. But you're not going to give away the crown jewels, are you? If you're working in a technical environment, you're certainly not going to do that. If you're working in an industrial environment, you may be dealing with, I don't know, formulas or industrial secrets or process secrets or discrete or process manufacturing capability that you wouldn't necessarily want competitors or others to know about. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the general information that we, for some reason, we know. It's just crazy as putting a paywall on a sales brochure, isn't it? Why should I pay for a sales brochure? It doesn't make any logical sense. It doesn't make any emotional sense. People aren't going to do it. They're just not going to do it. And the marketing people and the sales people will be, once again at loggerheads, won't they? About how many marketing ready leads have you got, and how many sales accepted leads have you got, and stuff like that, and how many traced to original source, like downloads from websites or downloads because of a piece of content that was put out across the social channels that we manage. Traced to original source, our numbers might be going down or up. Trust, you mentioned it earlier. Trust is actually dynamic. Trust can go down as well as up.
Yeah,
that's to bear that in mind.
That's such a good point, because I think if your content falls below the bar that most people actually know what remarkable content is, they do know. I mean, the number of marketers that I've spoken to that will say offline, to be honest, that the content's a bit, but it's okay. It's okay because we've got them to fill in the form.
Well, yeah.
What happens then when that trust goes springing right down?
How many times have I filled out a form and been disappointed by what I get?
Exactly. You've got that. You've gathered their contact information and lost their trust.
There's got to be a fair exchange of value. Can I have my email address back, please? There's got to be an exchange of value. I'm offering something about me. Now you offer something back about you and tell me something that scratches where I'm itching. So often the message that I get back after giving away my credentials is like, no.
Lawrence, I don't know if we're venturing, I suppose, I'm teetering on the edge of them wanting to talk about, as Joseph said, that of why people don't create remarkable content. And I suppose the obvious answer is they don't do all of the things that we've just been saying. But I think there is a deeper thing. I just wanted to pick up on what Joseph was talking about then about the crown jewels. I think you said, Joseph, secret sauce, as people often say.
Secret sauce.
And I think there is. I mean, we all know this. We've all got the idea, haven't we? That what is it? The thing that makes McDonald's so special, and it's Thousand Island dressing, and it's not a secret sauce. And I think that in some environments, companies have obviously code or something that they've created that is absolutely genuinely unique. But between that point and the point where you're just expecting, you're telling people that you're great and you're expecting people to believe that you're great because you say you're great. Between that point and there's stuff that there's no way I can possibly release. There's an awful lot of other stuff where you give of your IP, you give that experience, that knowledge, that understanding. And I think in a line that you've got to do to create that trust. And I think in a line, to me, the reason that people don't do remarkable content in a nutshell is because they haven't crossed the chasm, to use an IT expression. They haven't got to a place where they recognize that the way they're going to create trust, create traction, get interest, create opportunities and build their business is by being helpful to their customers. And they're still in a place where they see selling as something which they do to people rather than helping people. And when you cross that point, then you start having a completely different approach to content, and you see your content in terms of helping the person to solve the problem and giving generously of your knowledge. Once you do that, you build trust automatically. And that, I think, is the lack of an acceptance of that, usually in the C-suite. If I had a fiver for every marketer that I've met that absolutely gets that, but a C-suite or an exec suite or whatever you want to call it, who doesn't get that, I'd be much richer than I am. I think that to me is the core thing that stops people having remarkable content.
All right. Well, why don't we explore that a little bit more and ask ourselves, why do we think that people do struggle to create that that remarkable content that we've been talking about so far. In my experience, there's probably a couple of candidate reasons why that is the case. You know, for example, if you've got an internal marketing team, oftentimes you find in an industrial environment and manufacturing environment, there are, people with marketing in their job titles who are permanent staff. So, that's what I mean by an internal marketing team. It's marketing officers, marketing executives, public relations officers to an extent, right up perhaps even to a chief marketing officer if they have one of those. Not always is the case, but if they do, vice president of marketing, these kinds of things. Job titles is what I'm talking about. Now, these types of individuals may or may not be, how should we say, blessed with, creative skills or a background in advertising like I have, or something like that. They may not have ever been in a creative studio, or they may not have ever had much exposure to, say, art directing a campaign alongside a trusted agency, an external agency that they outsource to, for example, or they may not be getting along very well with their creative agency, and lots and lots of things are getting lost in translation. So that's another, perhaps a candidate reason why the production of remarkable content isn't happening and people struggle with it. The other potential candidate reason why people struggle with creation of remarkable content is they may be blessed with very, very well developed creative skills. The ideation, the concepts, and brilliant ideas for photographic or videographic or illustrative or schematic representations of what they're trying to say in their messages. But their hands are tied by externalities, and those kind of externalities could, close to home, they could be, the lack of budget, or restriction on budget, or in some cases slicing of budget. And that budget constraint has sometimes been placed upon them because of poor performance in the past of marketing related campaigns. So you have to think about the role of really rethink the role of production of remarkable content for better exploitation and better yield on the kind of campaigns that you want to run. If you're a numbers driven person, there's all kinds of metrics that you can deploy about measuring the success of a marketing campaign, measuring the penetration into a market space, or into if you like, slice and dice up the overall market into bite-sized chunks. We marketeers call that market segmentation, where you break it up into bite-sized chunks and make each chunk more manageable and more addressable, and we can talk in a slightly different way to that chunk than we do to that chunk. So this kind of segmentation, there's tools out there, aren't there? And I know Axon Garside are very, very good at this themselves, able to break up messages and send it to the correct audience using the tools available to them. And these things really help increase the belief that the C-suite, Ian, you mentioned about the C-suite, the belief that the C-suite has in the effectiveness of a marketing department. And I was working for a visionary CEO once, and just give you a quick anecdote. And he said an incredible thing to me once. He said, "Joseph, if this is successful, I will borrow money to give you more marketing budget." I thought, there's a man that really understands. I mean, really gets it now, because I was demonstrating to him, the increase, using the stats available to me at that time. I was able to demonstrate to him an increase in the things that he felt were important to his business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, James, if I sorry to come in now, I think that's really, really good point, because I think one of the things that you often hear marketers say, "Oh, well, the C-suite guys, they don't understand what I'm doing." and they make that the fault of the C-suite guys. And I think one of the takeaways from this is that you've got to educate them, and you've got to talk to them and explain what it is you're doing and why. For example, if you're doing something that is part of demand generation to change perception of your business, you have to explain what an appropriate metric is in that. If you're doing something which is designed to get readership, say like a blog, as a means to the conversion, which creates the contact, which creates the nurture, which creates the opportunity, and so on. You've got to explain to people why you're doing stuff and how you measure it, and give them that data so that they understand it. And I think very often there's a divorce between the C-suite and the marketing teams. And the marketing teams have got to get out the mindset that that's the problem of the C-suite. It's their problem. And ultimately, if they can't educate and they can't persuade, I mean, I had a conversation with a client the other day, and I said to them brutally, he said, I've done everything, we've tried everything, and there's no buying. And they said, what do you think I should do? And I said, get another job. Honestly, get another job. Because if you've done all of the right things, you've done all the education, you've given it your best, you're not going to get anywhere. And if you don't, if you can't get them to create that remarkable content, then it won't work. If it doesn't work, nobody's going to be happy. You're going to get demoralized. You're going to end up starting to question your own judgment, and that's not where you need to be. So you need to take the time to educate, but it's a main building block of remarkable content, I think.
That's something you don't hear on podcasts like this very often. That kind of advice, that's really insightful, and that's really fantastic. That's the voice of experience speaking there. That's really honestly, that's brilliant. Can I borrow that?
It's you know, and I do feel sorry for people in that situation, but I think the other thing I just wanted to pick up on that you were talking about there, I think, is a perception that I've come across in a lot of SMEs, and I'm going to define that SME. We work with a lot of businesses that are maybe 5 to 25 million turnover, say. They've got a small internal marketing team, they've typically got a sales team, and there is a perception that, let's call it creativity, this creative wrapper element that demands attention, that this isn't for people like us. This is for people with huge budgets, talking to your point. This is for people with big budgets, not for people like us. If we create virtuous good, even the people who are bought into the idea of creating good, helpful content, it's not for us to do that sort of thing. It's too expensive, it's too difficult, it's not for SMEs. And I think that, again, is a really important thing. One thing I would say about that is 25, 30 years ago, when I first started out in this, to find a platform for your creativity, you may have to do a lot of advertising, which paper-based advertising, which is expensive. You may have to go to trade shows, which potentially were expensive, although you've got a couple of anecdotes in your pocket, Joseph, about how you can make a lot of impact with a small spend in an exhibition. But still, a lot of people spend a lot of money. The thing is,
give me a box of paper clips and an expense account, and I can take over Europe. In fact, I did it.
I was going to say, but actually the thing today is that actually the platforms, because everything can be so targeted and can be so data driven, and there are so many things that are at your disposal, whether that's the camera on your phone, or the ability to use really cost effective, even free software to create graphics and so on. Actually, you can do an awful lot with not huge budgets, and the great news about that is it means that the dividing point is what's up there rather than the budget you spend. And you can really distinguish yourself, differentiate yourself, and find audience for your content in that kind of way. And I think actually very often the people who do the best work are the people with relatively small budgets, because they think harder and they work harder.
Make every pound count, right?
Every pound. I've got a friend who's working for a very, very, very large organization that we all like to buy things from, who talks about the way how hard budget works.
Let me give you a one-liner from another MD I reported into when I was buying from you, Ian. Alistair O'Reilly taught me, take pleasure in spending less. That's what he said.
That's right. So
take pleasure in spending less. And they would be the days where I'd go to him, with this fantastic ad deal that, someone from this publishing company had told me about. And, there was a great deal on the table. And he would turn around to me and say, offer them £500. Are you joking? The rack rate on this ad is 8,000.
Yep.
Offer them 500. Let's see what they say.
Yeah.
And I'm just using that as a quick example. That's old money. I know it's old money, and it's outmoded in some senses, that thinking now. But it's again, we touched on it earlier, a fair exchange of value. Do I want it so much that I'm prepared to pay that price for it, given the fact that I could buy an alternative today for comparatively less? And this is what is happening in the industrial and manufacturing world all the time. In people in industry making product that they sell through a network of distributors and sell to wholesalers, and then on to the final consumer, or through retail maybe in some cases, and then on to the final user. They're very mindful of this all the time. And so why shouldn't it also apply then into the marketing world? The democratization of technology is the proliferation of technology types to create remarkable content and do it quite well is there. So what do? You can go to the website of the vendor of that piece of electronic tooling or that digital tool application, whatever it is, pay your subscription for a year or by month, download or go into the cloud and use that piece of tool set. But quite often, you'd be faced with it and saying, well, what do I do with it? How do I use it, and how do I best exploit it? And that's where I think, anyway, a company like Axon Garside really, really comes into its own. Because, yes, you can go off and, buy your own subscription to the kind of tools that you sell and resell. But it's that knowledge to say, well, how do I best use it? How do I exploit the maximum value out of this subscription? How do I get what I need to achieve, in the fastest possible time frame, deliver my campaign on time and on budget? Now that's the skill. That is really a skill. And it's not about having so many apps on your computers, array of Macs or whatever it is that you use in your marketing teams these days. It's about how you use those tools available, and the knowledge and experience that comes behind doing that. It can only be found in organizations, in my opinion, with organizations like Axon Garside.
I think the part of the thing is, thank you for saying that. I think part of the thing is that sort of returns to one of the themes from a little while ago in this, is that part of what makes something remarkable is, does it work? Absolutely, it's got to work for the person reading it. It's got to be helpful. But does it work, and how is it going to work to achieve the goals of the company that's created it? And one of those things is joined up thinking.
Yeah.
So if you've got a piece of content that is not deployed at the right time in a timely fashion, it's deployed at in an appropriate time, it won't resonate with somebody. So telling somebody about a case study before you've educated them about why your type of solution is appropriate to their need is jumping the gun. It's not going to resonate. And part of it is, I think, thinking through. I'm going to use the example of a case study, which has just come into my mind actually from a conversation with a client the other day. Case studies. Everybody does case studies. Most people do case studies that say, we worked with this company, everything was brilliant, they're amazing, I can't believe how they do it for the money.
That's not a case study, that's advertorial.
That's and well, okay, right. So the conversation we had is like, okay, what is the story that we want to tell? What is the story that we've set up with our educational downloadable guide in that case? What is the story that we've set up? Because the case study needs to play to that tune rather than just be generic, first thing. Second thing is, speaking to the point about production values and so on, is we could create a very, very, very fancy one with all sorts of graphics. Now, actually, we're going to create something which is going to be to a high standard using very cost-effective software. But the real point that's going to cut through, I think, and cuts through in my experience, is we could just get into that make-believe land where everything's perfect, that absolutely nobody believes. that doesn't build any trust. But what we're actually going to do is say what I think is on the minds of most people, which is, I'm sure you're a great supplier when everything's working well. What sort of supplier are you when stuff goes wrong? Because it will go wrong. If you're implementing ERP software, it will go wrong. It's just a question of when it goes wrong. How does that company react to that? So the case study that we're going to do with this customer is going to talk about, in a real way, the customer is going to say, when it turned out that the information that we had fed into our project plan turned out to be flawed, it created a problem. And what I really want to talk about is how that company responded with that. Anybody who's a buyer in the real world will know that will resonate with them.
They will absolutely know.
Anybody that says you can put in an ERP software and everything went smoothly is just make believe, and no one believes it.
Exactly. And you're wasting your breath, you're wasting your time, and you're wasting other people's time in trying to tell it in a non-credible way.
Yeah.
You know, there's a big difference between incredible in a negative sense and incredible in a positive sense. Right?
Yeah.
You know, we started earlier by saying remarkable content is both visible and credible. You know, if you say something then that is incredible, as a positive or negative. You know, if it's incredible, wow, this is incredible. Usually it's incredible because it matches my problem.
Yeah.
So if you, in a case study or in a piece of remarkable content that is hinged on a case study or the deliverability of a case study, if you don't have some kind of problem solution impact template in your mind when you prep that, or even put in subheadings, you know, if you want to be really simplistic about it, you know, what the problem is, what the solution was, and what the impact was. You know, these kinds of, you know, simple three-part templates, that, you know, that's not rocket science, but it's so very often missed.
Yep.
And it's still missed. And I you know, I struggle to get to the bottom of why people don't do that anymore, don't do that at all.
Well, and that's maybe another theme here, isn't it? Is remarkable content. One of the definitions of remarkable content is content where you have a very, very clear idea of what that content job is, and a very clear idea of how it's going to answer the question, how does this, in my mind, how does this make it more likely that the person reading this, watching this, whatever, is going to buy for my business?
Yeah.
And if I haven't got an answer to that question, then I think if I'm the MD or the sales director, I'm absolutely right to ask the question in that case, why are you doing it? Why are you spending my valuable money?
What causes people to stop, to think, to act, to change, and do something different?
Yeah.
You know, is it that remarkable? I've got a problem with this. I'm going to go online and see if I can find a solution to it. You find something that resembles a solution. How does that then translate into my action next?
Yeah.
If the remarkable content is truly remarkable, it will probably tell you in a very encapsulated way, or maybe in a salient, distilled way, how you can overcome that problem. It won't necessarily give you all of the answer that you're looking for, but it will certainly signpost you towards where you can get that help.
Yeah. I think the one thing that occurs to me is we're talking about this, Joseph, that we haven't maybe said, but we probably should fess up to, is if you went back.
But confession time now, is it? what are we confessing to?
Yeah, turn the mic off.
What are you confessing to?
I mean, if you went back 20 odd years ago, then you'd find that a lot of businesses did create, let's call it creative kind of advertising type approach to marketing, where you had that old thing of, you know, half my marketing works and half of it doesn't. But the problem is I don't know which works. Yeah, all of that stuff that used to be around. But then you've got a new generation of marketers that have grown, quite rightly, have come to a point of professional seniority around quite rightly a data-driven approach, because you can now measure everything, and you can measure the effect of everything if you're doing it right. Although there are still a remarkable number of companies out there who, in my experience, are still not measuring at least the right things, but you can. And I think that's created an environment where it's almost like a politician in a focus group. I probably shouldn't say that this week, where you err on the side of the focus group, and you err on the side of caution. And the word that is lacking there is courage. You don't have the courage to go outside that comfort zone and sell that to your managing director with conviction. And the managing director doesn't have the courage to go outside the comfort zone and realize that if you play entirely safe, guess what? You will disappear. And it's not rocket science. And I think that we've kind of gone through this cycle now where we had marketing that was relying on that. And then we went into a world where we've got all of the data-driven stuff, all of the profiling, and all of the things that allow us to be really smart about how we use budget. And we've actually forgotten along the way the creative thing. And I think the people, in my view, who are going to stand out in the next couple of years are the people who can bring both of those things together, the courage and the conviction, as well as the data. And then you can have something that gives you the chance to be remarkable. And without that courage, you're going to struggle, I think.
I love that.
Yeah. So just on that then, Ian, it kind of leans quite nicely into the next thing I wanted to ask, really. So can you think of, or can you both think of an example, a particular instance of piece of remarkable content that has been truly remarkable, but also courageous simultaneously?
What does courage look like? Joseph, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to pick one from the past and one from a more current. So, the one from the past, for example, I was working in a subsidiary. Just contextualize it quickly for you. I was working in a subsidiary of a FTSE 250 listed business. That business was providing professional services primarily, some product resale, and they had a problem, a big problem. And the big problem was, where are we going to get the next deal from? In professional services, where the next deal is coming from is incredibly important. And so where we're going to get the next deal from, bearing in mind we need to have, 8 to 12 new logo wins per year. That's not easy. So, we've all heard, haven't we, over the marketing funnel, numbers at the top of the hopper, and it drips and goes through the funnel and comes out as a sales ready or sales actionable lead, and the sales teams go off and close that deal. But, how do you generate that in the first place? I mean, where do you start? And the big problem was the marketing team, the internal marketing team, with its limited bandwidth and its limited number of people, were, for example, trying to write blogs because the company felt, and the strategy of the C-suite, the directors, was that in order to win those kind of jobs, we need to position ourselves as thought leaders. So we were doing blogs, and the marketing teams were going from meeting to meeting, speaking to influential individuals in the business, and then writing up what they thought that specialist said. And of course, things get lost in translation. Things are missed or omitted inadvertently, or misconstrued in some cases, and then published as a blog. And that's one of the things that a marketing team can do well or badly. So what I decided to do was flip that on its head. And so that the author of the blog wasn't me or the team anymore. We were simply the facilitator of that. And we created an environment where, and we put this into the head of HR, and the head of HR accepted it, and put a metric, put a number on the specialists, the technical architects, and the technical specialists in different parts of the business, put a number on their annual review to say this number of blogs need to be created per year by you. And suddenly it was a whole new world. I mean, if you're working in an organization and maybe you're the marketeer that is charged with writing the blog content for your manufacturing or your industrial company, and you're really struggling trying to create that content, or even writing it, try to flip it and take that problem somewhere, preferably into the C-suite or into head of HR, for example, and say to them, I need the specialist's job to include writing this stuff. And we gamified it.
Yeah.
And we created a leaderboard. We published a leaderboard every month. Whose blog was getting read the most? And suddenly it triggered, it ignited a competition amongst all the different technical specialists, because everyone is a specialist and they've got their own street cred to think of, right?
Mm.
And we ran a competition that we called the yellow hoodie. You know, we like the golden hoodie, like almost like the Tour de France yellow jersey kind of theory. You know, it can only be one yellow hoodie. There can only be one yellow jersey winner that month. And so we gave the virtual yellow hoodie to the specialists who had written the blog that performed the best that month. And the gamification of that, why is that important? It's important because we never had a problem with content anymore.
Yeah.
And the content was so good because it was written by someone that truly understood it. And they understood how to say it to their peer. And that was the key thing. It was a peer-to-peer conversation all of a sudden. It wasn't a child speaking to an adult anymore, like a marketeer trying to speak to a CTO.
They didn't have to analyze data because they could remember conversations with actual customers.
They could. And also they were able to talk about that when they see them at the conferences, see these people giving keynote or workshop speeches. They could see the person on whose name was on the blog, and they would ask them about it, and they would. You said on your blog this. Can I ask you more about that? And the conversation happened. And see, this is the thing that triggers a bilateral conversation all of a sudden. Instead of a one-way conversation where you're delivering a message into a market, that market then is coming back with either a question or something back again. And that's the dynamic that truly original and remarkable content can do for you. It will create that conversation. And we used that word earlier in our conversation today about trust and credibility. There's very few better ways of doing it than create that understanding. Establish and maintain goodwill and understanding is the mantra of public relations, right? And that's the role of this content now. It's not a sell. It's talk to you.
Joseph, I think that's just such a beautiful example because essentially, I think one of the things that I was asking us about is, why don't people create remarkable content? And one of the reasons is because the people who've got the expertise in the business are not creating that content. And that's because they don't get the buy-in of the C-suite. It's because they don't get the buy-in of those experts. And that's such a great way of answering that. There is a whole podcast, I feel, on the subject of how do I get the buy-in of expertise, and that gamification example is great.
It's a great example. It's a great live example, and it's a demonstrable example. And the other thing that it overcame, by the way, while we're on that topic, is these people are busy people. Some of them are fee earners, some of them are designers, and some of them are extremely sought after in the business, and the demand on their diary is very high. So you don't want to waste their time. And often we found in their minds, and what they told us after they wrote and contributed something into the stockpile of remarkable content that we amassed, was that they were worried that no one's actually going to read it. They'd spend the hours and hours to write it, and who's going to read it anyway? But what we did, through the gamification, we were able to prove back to them the number of reads they got, the number of page views they got, the number of opens, number of click-throughs, and all these other things, all these other metrics that marketing people obsess about, which are just like internal units of measure. But what was the difference? The difference was marketing actually increased its own credibility with the specialists, as well as the company's reputation to the outside world.
I think that's. I'm going to do a very small advert for HubSpot. There are other systems available, folks, because I think when you're using a system like HubSpot, you can measure the reads, you can measure the click-throughs, you can see how many people took an action, and if you plug it into your core CRM, you can see how many opportunities that creates, and ultimately you can see how much revenue you can attribute. And I think in the best example I've ever come across of that, there was one particular sales guy, and anybody who's met a salesman or is a salesman will recognize this, who then got very used to the idea. He used to go to meetings and say, by the way, I'm paying you wages. Like vlogs. And, you know, it works beautifully. I thought, I think that's why I think it's such a great story, because it's gamification just plays. That's knowing your persona. That's going to play to a sales guy. So that's the best example of tailoring your idea to the target audience I can come across. So now the onus is on me. So an example. I'm going to give an example actually from a software company that sells into, should I say, into the manufacturing space, into SMEs. A lot of smaller manufacturing businesses don't have an ERP system. They have a finance system. They have some kind of production system. Inevitably,
quite a lot of spreadsheets,
and a lot of spreadsheets, and a lot of headaches. These guys sold an ERP system into that market, and their content, their downloadable guides and content was really educational stuff that linked the headaches that came around running your business through a spreadsheet with the solution of ERP. Is good education, good solid educational content, written with the input of sales, and with a really good understanding of the language and the pains of the potential buyers. It's really good stuff. And the creative element of that, and this is what an example perhaps what I was referring to earlier on, where the creative wrap around that was, we found this guy. This is a campaign we did. We found this guy who was the absolute spitting image of Ricky Gervais. I mean, to a ridiculous extent. And he had a mate who looked like, what was the guy called? Mackenzie Cook, wasn't it? The guy used to go on about being in the army. And so we did a series of videos about how this guy, the Ricky Gervais character, was tasked with finding what he described as an ERP system. And he went off to find the ERP system. And it was a little series, and it was basically a really imaginative way of getting across case studies and doing that educational piece. And he was great. The guy was hysterical to work with. But those videos got more traction than I remember than SAP's case studies in the SME segment in the equivalent period of time, because one of them, dare I say it, was a little bit pedestrian, and the other one, just if you typed in ERP blah 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 case study, and out came this guy who absolutely was Ricky Gervais. That really stood out. And so yeah, there was some spend there for sure, but it was the thinking and the courage combined with the integrity of the content that was genuinely helpful. Put that together, you got something that's a winning combination, I think.
I love that. What a great story.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and fish that one out, Ian, somewhere in a labyrinth, online labyrinth. But it's been such an amazing discussion. I've really, really enjoyed this. It's nice having a content-specific discussion.
Yes.
So just to kind of wrap things up, so we've kind of alluded to the fact that people or businesses in more conservative industries can perhaps struggle creating this remarkable content, but as almost like a key takeaway to kind of wrap things up, what would be like your golden piece of advice that you'd want to pass to people in those particular industries that can help them almost like facilitate their content creation?
I'm going to go back to that word, courage. Have the courage to give advice, have the courage to talk about things that other people don't talk to, and have the courage to share your content and communicate your content in a way that cuts through. Don't be ordinary, be extraordinary.
Yeah, I think you've really hit an important nail on the head there. And marketeers, we get a mixed reception as marketeers and creators of remarkable content, and disseminators and sender-outers of remarkable content. Some of us get decried and slated, but some of us get respected. And the difference between the two is, only two a penny marketers are two a penny, right? And you can differentiate yourself in your own career by doing things a little bit not left field or out of the box, but doing things in a brave way. But to be able to do those things in a brave way, you have to have the support behind you. So that support can come in terms of, say, if you're a marketing manager, for example, you've got a sales or a marketing director behind you that believes in what you do, believes in your judgment, trusts you to get on with the job, and is able to see the fruits of what you do. The fruits of what you do these days is measurable. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So as a marketeer, you've got to be able to put some numbers up on a board sometimes and say, this is actually what we did with the marketing budget that was allocated to us. If you give us more marketing budget, we can increase that by an X factor. If you give us less budget, you're going to suffer the impact by X or Y factor. And being able to put some quantification behind things is an immensely important ability now. And tools, I mean, you mentioned one earlier that you specialize in, and that you're incredibly good advising people and installing for people and helping people on their way using these kinds of tools, transforming their business and growing their business. These kind of tools can be misused. These kind of tools can completely saturate a marketing person if they're doing it unaided, if they're flying solo. So I would say, yes, be brave, but also be assisted, and don't think any the worst of yourself, and don't let others think worse of you, because you need a helping hand. So I think the takeaway really from a summary takeaway, I guess, is get that help that you need. Don't try and do things on the cheap. Don't just download it and try and make sense of it, because it's often it can't be done, and it can't be done within work time. So you don't want to spend all your weekends trying to figure out how these systems work. You have to ask a specialist. If you want to know, ask an expert, right? And without a doubt, Axon Garside is an expert in its field.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Ian. Thanks, Joseph. Obviously, we're here at Axon Garside, but Joseph, where can everyone get in touch with you if they want to get in touch?
Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out to me, ask me a few more questions as a result of listening to this podcast or seeing snippets online, please do so. You can reach me at josephspear.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Spear Joseph at the end, not the other guy. And on X, formerly Twitter, you can reach me there at Joseph Spear. I look forward to you reaching out.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Lawrence. Cheers.